So I think last week we got through, I'm thinking we finished up in 8, but is there any questions that we had before I started in verse 9, 2 Timothy 4? I'm thinking possibly we might. I thought that hand meant something. When it starts waving furiously, that's when I know something's going on. As it ended in verse 8 last week, now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. So that includes us, doesn't it? We're longing for his appearing. So he pretty much ends his charge to Timothy there. And now he's basically ending out his letter. In verse 9 it says, "Do your best to come to me quickly, for Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry." So he's asking Timothy to come to him. Now remember, this is his second imprisonment. The first one was not really that difficult. Kind of like in a rented hotel type deal. But this second one is quite a bit worse. We're talking the typical damp prison cell, cold, dark, not a very hospitable place. And not too many people are there to support him. Before, he had people coming all the time. This one, there's not too many supporting him. So he's asking Timothy to come, if he can. Do your best to come to me quickly. Demas, he's left him. And as we I think I had something there, Colossians 4:14. He basically got caught up in the world. He was part of them at one time, because in Colossians 4:14, our dear friend Luke, the doctor, and Demas send greetings. Give my greetings to the brothers in Laodicea. He was part of them, but he got caught up in the world. And he is left. So evidently, he was with him for a little bit, and then basically he went on, deserted him, as he said, and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Now we don't know, I don't know as they actually left him per se, but they had other business in other places. They couldn't stay there the whole time. Only Luke is with me. Luke was a physician. Probably a good thing he had him. He probably needed someone like that there. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. Now that's kind of strange, isn't it, to ask for Mark? Do you remember what happened with Paul and Mark before? They had a sharp misunderstanding and parted ways. And Mark went with Barnabas, and Paul took Silas, was it? And they just parted ways. Paul didn't have nothing to do with him. Disagreement. And now, evidently the ways have been mended. And he's saying, I want Mark, because he's good. He will help me in my ministry. Now he's still talking about his ministry, isn't he? He's in a cell, in a prison, and he's still talking about his ministry. How many of us would be that on fire for the Lord? To be still wanting to minister and not having the woe is me attitude that, you know, if I hadn't have ministered so much, I probably wouldn't be here. He's still, that's the number one thing on his mind, is reaching out to people.
Well, in 13, he's asking for books and...
Exactly.
Books. So he may be still even going to write letters or whoever. Whoever.
And that was one thing, let's see, 12. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus, and when you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. He's wanting those things. Now he wants his cloak, he wants his parchments, his scrolls. He's still studying. He's still deeply involved in this. Now, it tells me he doesn't have a whole lot in this world, does he? All he's asking for is his cloak and his books. That's it. He's not saying, hey, could you send me, 2 or 3 pair of socks or something, I mean, I could use some other stuff here, Toothpaste, soap, it'd be nice. He's asking for his cloak and his books. Just a covering and my books. Makes me wonder, when it says that this is the bread of life, the living water. I mean, he wasn't concerned about anything else other than being in God. Knowing all that he possibly could. Because he knows it's his last days. It's a short time now. Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. Now we had talked about Alexander before. He was in 1 Timothy, where it talked about him. Done him great harm. Now I think he wasn't he in Acts 2? Alexander there that was,
and stirring up people because they were going to lose business.
Business because of, when they're making idols to these other gods out of silver or metal or whatever, that's their business. And when somebody comes in and says, hey, worshiping those idols is worthless, that takes away your business. And he was one of them that was trying to psych the crowd up and say, hey, let's get rid of these guys. And once again, Paul's bringing up to be aware of these people. Because he said, he did me great harm. Great deal of harm.
Is he talking there physically or with his ministry? Both, we know.
I would say probably it was part of his imprisonment, but I would say mostly verbally.
Because it's interesting that he's a coppersmith or metal, so you're picturing a burly guy that's pounding on things, and it may have been both, yeah.
Yeah, it could have been.
Just curious.
But I think there in Acts he was basically kind of trying to incite the crowd to. And the other silversmith, I think, was there also, and he was making the point too that they're going to ruin our business.
Well, maybe 15 answers that question, I guess.
Oh, and 50, yeah.
Yeah, I think that answers what he's doing.
You too should be on your guard against him because he strongly opposed our message, which, that's what he was doing. There possibly could have been some physical. Who knows? But anytime you're in opposition, it's going to cause great harm when you're in opposition to the gospel. And that's what he's basically trying to do, is preaching to the Gentiles, to the Jews, whoever would listen. And these guys were getting in his way and saying, no, don't listen to him. Paul doesn't have the right message. Just continue on buying your trinkets from us, and everything will be fine. And Paul is not for that. So he said, he basically another warning to Timothy. Be on your guard against him. Because he will probably do the very same thing if Timothy presents the same message, won't he? It would be the same thing. If we present the gospel and we have opposition, if I present it and I have opposition, if Paul presents it, he's more than likely going to have opposition too, with the same people. Because the message is the same. Now, if you change the message, if Timothy would change the message and said, it's all right to have these engraven images or whatever, then they would probably be all for it. But when you keep the message the same, and it's in opposition of what the majority of the people are thinking, you're going to have problems.
What's hitting him in his livelihood?
Exactly. In their livelihood. And that's the thing. What was Paul's livelihood? What did he do? He was a tent maker. What was his number one job?
Preaching the gospel.
Preaching the gospel. That was the number one. Tent making was secondary.
He only did that to get enough money to live on.
Exactly. And most of the time, I think people probably took care of him. As it talked about the other disciples. When you go into a house, that will greet you. Roger.
So when he tells Demas to come quickly, or no, I guess Demas forsook him, but
Yeah.
Mark to come quickly,
For Timothy to come quickly.
Timothy.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the condition of those prisons, but I've heard that they were like cold and damp, and then when the winter comes on, they didn't supply the prisoners with, stuff to keep them warm.
Oh, no, there was-
Their relatives or somebody else had, so that, he's not whining or sniveling, but he wanted that coat quickly.
Exactly.
And he had to be suffering from the
Mhm.
cold if.
Well, sure.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that was pretty urgent, I would think.
And one of the things too I was reading, when you are basically put under arrest, they take everything you got. They take, evidently Paul, before he was arrested, he must have given the cloak and the parchments and the scrolls with Carpus at Troas. He left them with him before he was arrested. So now he's requesting Timothy, go get them. Dan.
And you notice, starting in in verse 11, Luke there,
Yeah.
he's telling Luke, notice his priorities. He wants Mark to come because he's useful for the ministry. That's his number one priority.
Yep.
Then his cloak and his books and his parchments. So if you look at his priorities, he wants Mark there to help him with the ministry. That's first and foremost on his mind.
Mhm.
But while you're coming, pick these up for him.
Exactly. Yeah. And hopefully Timothy will be able to bring this, before he's gone. Because I'm not sure exactly what that time frame is, but I think it was in 64, AD, is when Nero basically beheaded him. Because of the fires they were blaming on the Christians, and Paul was the man that was in prison, so they decided to behead him. It was interesting. He was a Roman citizen. That's why they couldn't crucify him. They couldn't throw him in with the lions. That was typical for a Roman execution, was beheading. But Peter, they hung upside down, crucified him. And you think, wow, to think that all of that stuff is going on. And you think how different the traditions were. They could have crucified him and made it worse on him, but no, because he was a Roman citizen, they couldn't do that. Specific laws and the way that goes. At my first defense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. Verse 16. May it not be held against them. And when he said, at my first defense, this is not the first time he was in prison. This is the second time. When basically there was no one around. No one was there to defend him. Now, I don't know where, evidently Luke arrived later. Demas probably had already left. So he basically had no one there to support him. Everyone had deserted him. And what's his attitude towards them? May it not be held against them. What's that remind you of? On the cross. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing.
Also Stephen when he was being stoned.
Yep. Same kind of an attitude. Do we have that same kind of an attitude today? When someone pulls out in front of us in traffic, do we have that same attitude towards them? Oh, Father, forgive them. They just didn't know what they're doing. Not really.
Not very often.
Not very often. A lot of times it's that flash, and it's like, oh, shouldn't think like that. But, and think of this. I mean, what Paul has been through.
Yeah.
And then he says, don't hold it against them. I mean, that would be pretty tough when there's no one there to defend you. And there's people there that believed the same as he did, but no one was there. Don't hold it against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen.
It's interesting that the ones who didn't stand with them, he told, don't charge it against them. But he didn't have that same mercy for Alexander, did he?
No. No, he basically said, the Lord's going to deal with him.
Yeah.
The Lord will repay for what he has done.
Obviously.
So, I'm sure.
His forgiveness only goes so far.
Well, and who knows why they didn't stand with him at the first defense? Who knows? I mean, they may have had to go back to where they were. They may have been overdue to go back to take care of the churches where they were taken care of, whatever. We don't really know. It doesn't specifically say, but evidently, maybe they had a good heart, but they just couldn't be there. But evidently, Alexander did not have a good heart. He did not have anything good about this whole thing, because he's basically saying, Lord, take your vengeance out on him. Repay him for what he's done. So evidently, he done him a pretty bad wrong.
Yeah, and here in verse 16, you see that not only did they not come and stand with him, but they actually deserted him.
Mm-hmm.
So he felt they left him. Not because they were called away, but they weren't going to stand with him at
Right.
this point. Because they're probably afraid, because you got to remember the high persecution these guys are under. And that's the last thing anybody wants to do, is be thrown in prison with somebody.
What did the disciples do with Jesus?
Yeah, only Peter stayed.
Who stood? And what did Peter do?
Denied,
He denied him 3 times.
but he was there.
Well, he was in the crowd. He followed, but I don't know if you can say he really supported him or not. I mean,
Earlier, he started out good. He just
oh
got
yeah,
peer pressure.
he did. But that's the thing. I mean, when the pressure is on, I mean, we're talking that the first imprisonment. That's what's so amazing. The first imprisonment wasn't really what we would call imprisoned. I mean, you were basically on probation in a rental house.
House arrest.
Yeah, house arrest. People came and went. I mean, they were there to encourage him, support him, and everything. This is different. This is in a cold, dark cell.
Actually, it was probably a hole in the ground.
Yeah, hole in the ground with bars on top.
Look at home that has a picture of what they think was the
Mhm.
prison room that he was in.
How many people would want to visit there?
Yeah.
You know, yeah, open up garden, I'll just go in and I'll visit with Paul. How many of us would really want to do that?
Well, I wonder if they would be allowed.
And yeah, that, or if you were siding with Paul, maybe he would just lock you in and say, hey, we got one more.
Well, I was looking at a reference in the first chapter of 1 Timothy, and when he's talking about Hymenaeus and Alexander, whom I have handed over to Satan.
Mm-hmm.
He'd already done that, so that they will be taught not to blaspheme.
Right.
So evidently, they're still blaspheming. They're still causing him trouble. And he's saying, God's going to take care of his vengeance is his.
Right.
And I don't know, I was just thinking about this. You know, Paul would have been put to death a long time ago if it wasn't for the fact that he was a Roman.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Being a Roman citizen.
And here, he's
Prolonged it.
purposely teaching to the Gentiles. Maybe some of these were Gentiles who wouldn't have, even though he was treated poorly, they'd have been treated even worse.
Worse.
So maybe that's why they didn't stand in his defense. I'm gonna look that up, but, you know.
Well, you know, and that's the thing. It's amazing because his whole attitude may it not be held against them.
Right.
And the others,
I understand.
yeah, the other ones, I mean, they done probably just as bad. I mean, they deserted him, they talked down on him, but Lord, take vengeance on them.
It sounds like Alexander was proactive.
I would say he was probably the one
He's been
that,
a thorn in the side for a while,
Yeah.
yeah.
right. And the others, you know, like you say, they may have been Gentiles and maybe they just didn't know enough. Maybe they were a little spooked that, you know, I don't want to hang around this guy too
They would
much
have been
because,
treated a lot different than a Roman.
right. So, yeah, there was advantages to being a Roman citizen at that time. Not that it helped Paul much in the end, but I mean, I guess beheading would be a lot better than being crucified. I mean, it would be instantaneous. But still, to have being thrown in prison the way he was, and all the stuff that he went through his whole ministry, the stoning, beatings, all of that stuff.
Left for dead a couple of times.
Exactly. Yeah, they took him outside, stoned him, and left him for dead. The disciples stood around, and he finally woke up, and they went back into the city. It's like, would we? If we were stoned and left for dead outside, would we come back into Salmon? I mean, we'd be looking for another place, you know, that they didn't know me.
How long was Paul in prison the second time?
I'm not sure if we know exactly how many he was there. Years, months, I'm not sure.
Jeff, in this study Bible I have, it says here, he's gone into prison in 62 and martyred in 66, about 4 years.
Okay. Yeah. That's long enough to dwell on all of the things that you have done in your life and a lot of alone time. You know, and what has my life been worth? And as we read before, you know, he said, you know, I'm being poured out like a drink offering. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now that's a lot to be thinking about when you're in prison for 4 years. I have done everything that I possibly can. And then he asked for his coat, send my books, my parchment. I want to continue to do this. I want to continue to teach. I want to continue to minister even though I'm in a bad place. And in all of this, these are the last words basically that he is writing in prison, and he's giving all this encouragement to Timothy, knowing that Timothy is probably going to go through the same thing that he did. The same thing. His final greetings, these are the last words that Paul basically wrote. Greet Priscilla and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, and I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. Do your best to get there before winter. Eubulus greets you, and so do Prudence Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you. I think we mentioned last week about Trophimus. He left sick in Miletus. And we don't know what that meant, really. Does that mean that he had been sick for a long time, or did he just get sick and he left him there? Was it kind of a permanent sickness or whatever? But Paul had the ability to heal, didn't he? In fact, I was reading a little bit earlier, he actually just needed to look upon someone and they could be healed.
Even something he had touched.
Yep, even handkerchiefs, the fringes on their clothing,
But that was for a purpose.
for a purpose.
Okay, what he said
It wasn't a selfish thing where I can heal myself. It was
Exactly.
for a purpose to
Exactly.
further the gospel.
And we don't know what the situation here was with this man, whether he needed to be healed, or if it's just stating that he was sick, or what. But there are instances where healing wasn't done. And, we
You
can...
can imagine if that's what they were doing to everyone, they wouldn't have had time to do anything else,
Exactly.
if you think about it.
Well, the point was not healing their physical, but to heal their
Spiritual.
spiritual, give them salvation.
And what was required in the healing? The one thing that was required in the healing was faith. That was the main thing. If they had faith, that's what healed them, according to what he said. Your faith has healed you.
And it wasn't Paul, but the Spirit working through him.
Exactly.
Paul in himself couldn't do that.
Right.
And if you look at 22, he says, look what's important, the Lord be with your spirit,
Yes.
not your physical thing,
Mhm.
but your spirit. And then if you look back at 18, I think it's a really strong statement there, because you can see he knows it's the end, and he says that through all this I've dealt with, God's helped me through it, and now he's going to safely get me to his heavenly
Right.
kingdom. And that's where his focus is.
Right. Well, and he has nothing really to look forward to. He knows what's going to happen. He's going to be
In this world.
beheaded.
Except for that heavenly home.
Right.
In this world, yeah.
In this world. How many of us have that same outlook right now? Is that what we're looking at? Are we looking at this present age, are we looking at that? Or are we looking at something in this world?
We should be
that's-
looking toward Christ all the time.
We should be.
Because if we don't,
Exactly.
that's it.
But when you look at us in this world, what do we think about? What do we think about? Trucks breaking down. Should I get a new truck? No. Job is not too, it's kind of a dead-end job. Should I look for another job? There are so many things that go on in our minds every day. Do we think about the glory that's coming? Does it cross our minds during the day that, Christ could come today, right now? We could meet him in the air right now, and what a glorious time that would be. Do we think of that very often?
Satan wants to keep us distracted.
Exactly.
Because he does not want us to think on that.
He does.
The older we get as Christians, the more we do think about that kind of stuff. Because I know in my life, I'm at the point where I'm thinking, well, if I get sick or cancer or whatever it happens to be, that's okay, I'm going to go be with the Father.
And that is very common, because I know 25 years ago, I didn't think of heaven near as much as I do now.
Yeah.
And as we do get older, and I don't know whether that's maturity or if that's just our bodies breaking down and we realize that we ain't going to last. But the thing of it is, 25 years ago, my life could have been snuffed out like that.
Same thing, yeah.
Same thing. It could have been just snuffed out. And yet he has kept me here for this long. Why? Because he has something for me to do. Every one of us that is alive in here right now, there's something that he wants us to do. And he tells us in Matthew what we're supposed to be doing. Going into all the world.
Well, he also says he wishes that none should perish.
He wishes what?
That none should perish.
That none should perish, exactly.
So we all need to be striving to be right with
Exactly.
God every day.
Because even us as Christians struggle. Even us, as it tells us many times in the Bible, we can be a Christian and we can fall away. We can be strung out by the devil and he can lead us down another path that we think, yeah, that's not too bad. And we take our eyes off of Christ. Next thing you know, we're not thinking of eternal glory. We're thinking of how can we have it good here now? Tony.
You know, I was talking to Artie last night about pretty much this whole conversation, and, you know, I think back on my life as a child and everything, how many hundreds of thousands of times, and I'm not exaggerating, I should have died. You know, because of my own self, or being hit in the head too much, or, you know, all of the things, and not have brain damage, you know, because a lot of it I put on myself, you know, because I was running from myself, you know, self-medicating all those years, and, you know, not one time busted with cops or anything. I mean, it's astronomical what God has done in my life to protect me. And so then it comes up the question that you just said, you know, what am I going to do with what I have left? And my learning, you know, and God's blessings for me to be alive and to serve him and be able to go to heaven. I mean, It's just huge, because so much stuff, you know, it's just too much for a person to understand, you know, why, you know.
Well, and
I know why now, you know.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And we don't know, I mean, God's ways are way higher than ours.
Yeah.
But I do know there is a reason that we are all here. And he's made that clear. We are here to do his work as servants of his. And just as Paul is giving the command to Timothy, Paul might as well be doing the same thing to us in his words. Because all of these apply to us. We're in a place that it would be very easy to be drawn away by an Alexander, by a Demas. Any of them. We could be drawn away. We could follow them. We could say, yeah, they've got something better. We could do that. And he's warning Timothy in this whole book, be on your guard, the same as he would be warning us. Be on your guard. Because there are people out there that don't care about you. They don't care where you spend eternity. And that's why it's so important, as you pointed out, you know, that the Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you.